The morning my daughter-in-law called to tell me what I owed, I was standing at the kitchen sink, watching a cardinal on the back fence. Red bird, gray sky. February. I had a mug of coffee in my hand, decaf, because my cardiologist told me to switch after the thing with my heart last spring. And I remember thinking the cardinal looked cold. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up because I thought it might be my son. It wasn't. Hi, Bet, that's what she called me. Not Mom. Never Mom. Always Bet, like I was a coworker she barely tolerated. I wanted to confirm the details for the anniversary dinner. I set down my coffee. My son Philip had been married to Tara for 9 years. In those 9 years, I had learned that when Tara said she wanted to confirm details, she meant she had already made decisions and was now informing me of them. We're doing Hartwell, she said. Hartwell was the kind of restaurant where the prix alone ran $200 a person. Private dining room. Saturday the 22nd. We're thinking around 20 guests. I waited. The room deposit is $1,500, and obviously the dinner will be on you. It's your anniversary too, after all. My anniversary. She meant mine and my late husband Leonard's. Our 40th would have been that March. Leonard died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He was gone in 4 months from diagnosis. Tara, I said carefully, I'm not sure I understand. This is a celebration of my marriage. And ours, she said. We're doing a joint thing. It's elegant. People do this. I looked at the cardinal. He hadn't moved. We'll need a yes by Friday, she said. The deposit is non-refundable. I told her I'd think about it. She told me there wasn't much to think about. I said goodbye and she hung up first. I stood there for a while. I washed my mug. I dried it. I put it back in the cabinet on the left side, which was where Leonard always kept his mug, and I stood there with my hand on the cabinet door for probably longer than I should have. Then I walked to my study and opened my laptop and booked a cruise. Let me go back. I was 63 years old, and I had been a quiet woman for most of my life. Not shy. Quiet. There's a difference. Shy is fear, quiet is a choice, and sometimes it's the wrong one. Leonard and I got married in 1984 in a church in Dayton, Ohio, where both our families were from. We moved to Charlotte for his work. He was in industrial equipment, not glamorous, but steady, and we built a life there. We had Philip, and then 7 years later we had my daughter Meredith, and we were a family that ate dinner together most nights and took one vacation a year, usually somewhere with a beach, and argued about things that didn't matter and loved each other in the ordinary, unremarkable way that I've come to understand is actually extraordinary. I worked part-time when the kids were young. Library system, children's services, then acquisitions. When Philip went to college, I went back full-time and eventually became assistant director of the county branch. I retired at 60 when Leonard got sick because I wanted to be there, and I was every day until the end. After he died, I was the kind of loss that doesn't look like loss. I still got up in the morning. I still went to the grocery store. I sent birthday cards on time. From the outside, I probably looked fine. Inside, I was a room with all the furniture removed. Philip was attentive for the first few months. He called regularly, came by on weekends. But Philip had always been a man who took cues from his wife, and Tara was not a woman who made space for grief that inconvenienced her. By the end of the first year, the calls had tapered and the visits had a scheduled, obligatory feeling, like he was checking a box. Meredith was different. She lived in Portland. She'd married a man named Seth, who did something in renewable energy that I never fully understood, and she called me every Sunday without fail. She sent books she thought I'd like. She flew in for my birthday without being asked. She was the kind of daughter that made you feel like you did something right. But Meredith had her own life, and I didn't want to be a burden, so I didn't tell her how often I sat in Leonard's chair in the evenings and just held the quiet. What I did instead, eventually, was start living again. It started small. I joined a walking group through the senior center, though I hated the phrase senior center and still do. I signed up for a watercolor class at the Arts Council. I had no talent for it, but I liked the smell of the paint and the company of people who were trying something. I started having lunch every week with my friend Marlo, who'd been widowed herself 6 years prior and had a dark sense of humor about it that I found more comforting than anything well-intentioned anyone had said to me. And I started saving. Not obsessively, but purposefully. Leonard had left me in good shape. The house was paid off. I had my pension from the county. His life insurance had been substantial. And I realized that I could, if I chose, do things I'd always said someday to. The cruise was one of them. It was a 21-day Mediterranean sailing. Rome to Barcelona with stops in Sicily and the Amalfi Coast and Dubrovnik, and a handful of other places that had been photographs in books my whole life. I'd mentioned it to Leonard once, maybe 15 years ago, and he'd said someday. And we both meant it. And then there was no someday. I booked a balcony cabin. Single occupancy. I didn't tell anyone. Not immediately. Tara called again on Thursday, a day before her self-imposed deadline. Did you decide? I did, I said. Great. I'll send you the Venmo for the deposit. I won't be able to make it, I said. A pause. What? The 22nd? I have a prior commitment. Bet. Her voice dropped into that register she used when she thought I was being difficult. This is your son's anniversary dinner. And your 40th would have been. I know when my anniversary would have been, I said quietly. Then you understand why this matters. I do understand. And I'm sorry I'll miss it. I hope you have a wonderful evening. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what prior commitment could you possibly have that's more important than your own family? I thought about Sicily. I thought about the Amalfi Coast. I thought about a balcony and the Mediterranean and 21 days of being somewhere Leonard and I had said someday too. I'll be traveling, I said. She laughed. Not kindly. Traveling. Where? I'm not sure I need to share my itinerary, Tara. The conversation ended shortly after that. I sat with the phone in my lap and felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Not quite peace. Something more like recollection. Like I had remembered a word I'd been trying to think of for years. Philip called the next morning. I love my son. I want to say that clearly, because what comes next could make you think otherwise, and that would be wrong. I love Philip the way you love someone you watched learn to walk, someone you held through nightmares, someone whose face you've memorized in every version it's ever been. I love him even when he disappoints me, which is its own complicated thing. Mom, he said, Tara's upset. I know, I'm sorry she's upset. She planned this whole dinner. It took weeks. I appreciate the thought. The room deposit. I didn't agree to the deposit, Philip. You could have said something sooner. And here was the moment. Here was where the old bet, the quiet bet, the one who smoothed things over and absorbed the rough edges and apologized for things that weren't her fault. Here was where that bet would have said, I'm sorry, and what can I do, and let me fix this. I breathed. I said something as soon as I'd decided, I told him. I gave her more than a week's notice. I'm not responsible for a non-refundable deposit I never agreed to pay. Philip went quiet in the way he did when he was recalibrating. Where are you even going? He said finally. On a cruise, I said. The Mediterranean. Another pause. Longer this time. By yourself. With about 900 other passengers, I said. And myself, yes. He didn't know what to do with that. I could feel him trying to find the angle, the argument, the pressure point. He was his mother's son in a lot of ways, but in this way he was very much his wife's husband. Meredith thinks this is a good idea, he said. I haven't told Meredith yet. Don't you think? Philip, I said. I love you. I'll send you a postcard from Dubrovnik. I hung up gently. I told Meredith that weekend. She was quiet for a moment after I explained the whole thing. The dinner, Tara's call, the deposit I'd supposedly owe, my booking. Then she said, Mom, you booked a 21-day Mediterranean cruise. I did. By yourself. I did. Because your daughter-in-law expected you to fund her anniversary party disguised as yours. That's a fairly accurate summary. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Then she started laughing. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that takes over. Mom, she said when she could talk again. I'm so proud of you, I can't stand it. Seth made her call me back when she told him the story. He said to tell me I was his hero. I said that was very kind. There's something people don't tell you about spending 9 years biting your tongue. The first time is the hardest. You let something go. something that shouldn't have been let go, because the moment has passed and you don't want to cause trouble, and anyway, it probably doesn't mean anything. Then it happens again, and again, and each time is slightly easier than the last, not because it hurts less, but because you have already established the pattern, and it takes more energy to break a pattern than to continue one. Tara had a way of making me feel like a guest in my own family. Not overtly. She was never cruel in a way you could point to. It was more like a constant ambient signal. You are here on my terms. At holidays, she managed the seating and the menu and the timeline, and my suggestions were received with a smile that meant no. When Philip and I wanted to watch old football games on Sundays, she'd find reasons they needed to leave. When I offered to babysit my grandson Oliver, who was 6 and wonderful and smelled like Play-Doh, she'd thank me and find a reason to use the neighbor's daughter instead. I don't think she was a bad person. I've thought about this a great deal. I think she was a person who needed control and who found me threatening in a way she may not have been able to articulate. I reminded her of the life Philip had before her, and she didn't know what to do with that. What I do know is that over 9 years, I paid for a lot of things I was never asked about. I paid for it because it was easier, because I told myself it was what mothers did, because I didn't want to see the look on Philip's face when things went badly at holidays. The birthday dinners, Philip's, Tara's, Oliver's. Always at restaurants they chose, always the bill quietly slid to me at the end. One year, it was a steakhouse in uptown Charlotte, where the bill for 12 people was $1,100, and Tara ordered the Wagyu. I paid it and didn't say a word. Christmas gifts for their side of the family, because you're so good at that kind of thing, Bet. 2 years of Oliver's preschool tuition, framed as a gift to the family, which I gave because I wanted to, and which became expected because I had. The year Leonard died, I paid for the funeral and for the reception and for the hotel rooms for out-of-town family, and Tara pulled me aside at the reception to mention that the catering ran a little over budget, and she'd covered the difference, and I paid her back that same week without thinking twice. I'm not telling you this to make Tara into a villain. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how it happens. How a reasonable, intelligent woman can look up one day and realize she has been paying for things she never agreed to, not because anyone forced her, but because she stopped asking herself what she actually wanted and started asking what would keep the peace. The call about the anniversary dinner was the call where I finally asked myself, and the answer was, not this. I left on a Thursday in late February. I drove myself to the airport. I checked one suitcase and carried on a tote bag with 2 books I'd been meaning to read for years, a travel journal, and Leonard's old Nikon. He had taught me to use it, and I'd barely touched it since he died. I figured I owed it to both of us. The flight to Rome was long and cramped, and the man in the seat next to me fell asleep on my shoulder. Somewhere over the Atlantic, which I didn't mind. I watched 2 movies I'd already seen and ate a meal I couldn't identify, and landed at Fiumicino in the early morning when the light was the color of weak tea. I took a taxi to a small hotel near the Pantheon that Marlowe had stayed in years ago and told me was worth every cent. I slept for 6 hours and woke up to church bells. Rome was the first city Leonard and I had put on our someday list. I had forgotten how much I'd wanted to see it until I was standing in front of the Trevi Fountain at 8 in the morning with my camera, watching tourists throw coins, and I started to cry. Not the sad kind, or not only that. The kind that comes when something you've been carrying for a long time gets set down. I spent 3 days in Rome before the ship. I ate carbonara at a table on a cobblestone street, and a waiter told me it was the best thing on the menu, and he was right. I went to the Vatican and stood in the Sistine Chapel and looked up for a long time. I visited a small museum of ancient maps that no one else seemed to be in and spent an hour looking at how people had drawn the edges of the world before they knew what was there. I bought a postcard. I sent it to Philip from the post office near my hotel. On the back I wrote, "Thinking of you. Rome is beautiful. I hope the dinner was wonderful. Love, Mom." I meant all of it. That was the thing. I wasn't angry anymore. Somewhere between booking the cruise and the Trevi Fountain, the anger had dissolved into something more like clarity. I wanted my son. I wanted a relationship with him that wasn't mediated by someone else's comfort level. I wanted to watch Oliver grow up. I wanted holidays that felt like family and not like performances. I just wasn't willing to purchase those things anymore. The ship was called the Adriatic Star, and it was larger than I'd imagined and smaller than I'd feared. I had a balcony cabin on the 8th deck, and the first morning I woke up to the sound of water and opened the sliding door and stood there in my robe and thought, "Leonard, look where we are." I made friends the way you do on a ship, which is quickly and with surprising honesty, because you're all in the same floating world together and the usual walls seem unnecessary. There was a woman named Greta from Minnesota, a retired schoolteacher who'd done something similar. Booked the trip after her youngest moved across the country, and she realized she'd spent 30 years waiting for a good time to travel. There was a couple from outside Philadelphia, both in their 70s, who'd been married 44 years and held hands at dinner every night. There was a man named Arthur, a retired history professor from Vermont who knew everything about every port we stopped at and was delighted to share it whether you asked or not. I loved all of them. Amalfi was the one that got me. We docked at Salerno and took a small boat along the coast, the cliffs rising straight up from the water, the towns stacked on top of each other like they'd been dropped from a great height, and landed exactly right. Greta and I shared a bottle of local white wine on a restaurant terrace above the water, and she asked me what had brought me here. I told her the short version, the call, the deposit I didn't owe, the cruise I booked. She nodded slowly. "And how long had it been building?" she asked. I thought about 9 years of restaurant bills. I thought about preschool tuition framed as a gift. I thought about a reception where I'd reimbursed my daughter-in-law for catering at my own husband's funeral. "Long enough," I said. She raised her glass. I raised mine. "To knowing when," she said. "To knowing when," I agreed. Philip texted while I was in Dubrovnik. I'd been walking the old city walls with Arthur, who was explaining the history of Ragusan Republic trade routes, with the enthusiasm of a man who had never once in his life been accused of being boring about something. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I looked at it briefly, walking. "Mom, we need to talk when you're back." I put the phone away. I looked out over the Adriatic. The water was so blue it looked like someone had decided what blue should mean, and then painted the whole sea that color. I texted back that evening from my cabin, looking forward to it. 2 weeks. He sent a thumbs up. I didn't know what to make of that, and then I decided not to make anything of it and went to dinner. I've thought about what I want you to understand from all of this. I don't want you to think I'm a woman who stopped loving her son. I don't want you to think this is a story about triumph, about winning something or beating someone. That's not what happened. What happened is quieter than that. I was a woman who had spent 3 years being quietly undone by grief and then quietly rebuilt herself. And in the rebuilding, I had gotten clearer about what she was made of, what she was willing to carry, and what she was setting down. Not out of coldness, out of love. Love for herself, which had taken a long time to locate again, and love for the people in her life that was honest enough to stop pretending. I didn't go to Italy to punish Philip. I went to Italy because Leonard and I had said someday, and I was the only one of us left to go. That's the thing about someday. It is not patient. It does not wait for the circumstances to improve, or the relationships to clarify, or the people around you to finally appreciate you. Someday is happening right now, whether you're on it or not. I was on it. Finally, I got home on a Tuesday. The house felt the same and different, the way it always does after travel, like it belongs to someone slightly changed. I unpacked, did laundry, called Marlo and talked for an hour. She said I sounded different. I said I felt different. She said good and told me about a trip to New Mexico she was considering, and I told her to book it. Philip came over on Saturday. He came alone, which surprised me. I had expected Tara, the united front. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd sat for most of his childhood, and I made coffee. Regular because he likes it strong. And set out the shortbread cookies he'd always liked. He looked at the cookies for a moment, then at me. "How was it?" he asked. "Beautiful," I said. "I took about 400 photographs. I'll show you sometime." He nodded. Then he was quiet in a way that wasn't comfortable quiet. It was the quiet of someone trying to organize something complicated. "I owe you an apology," he said, finally. I waited. Tara's not wrong about everything. But she was wrong about this. The dinner, the deposit. That wasn't fair to you. He looked down at his coffee. I knew it wasn't fair and I didn't say so. That's my part. I looked at my son, 53 years old, hair going silver at the temples the same way Leonard's had, the same way mine would have if I hadn't made a different choice. "I love you," I said. "That's not conditional on this conversation." He looked up. "But I'm done paying for things I didn't agree to," I said. "Not because I'm keeping score, because I've spent 9 years trying to make things easy, and it didn't make things easy. It just made them expensive." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he said, those 2 words. I had not expected them to land the way they did. We sat with our coffee. He ate 2 shortbread cookies and told me about Oliver's soccer team, and I told him about Greta from Minnesota and Arthur, and the history of the Ragusan Republic that I now knew more about than I'd ever anticipated. And it wasn't fixed. Nothing was fixed, not in an afternoon over coffee, and I'm too old to believe in fixes that fast. But it was honest, and honest, between my son and me, had been rarer than it should have been. That was worth something. It was worth a great deal. In April, I had the photographs from the trip printed at a shop downtown. 412 of them, though I only kept about 60 that were truly good. Amalfi from the water, the ancient map museum in Rome, the walls of Dubrovnik at late afternoon when the light turns everything gold. A woman on the ship who'd seen me with the Nikon asked if I was a professional, and I said no, just learning. She said it didn't look like just learning. I think Leonard would have liked that. I framed 6 of the best ones. I hung them in the hallway where I pass every morning on the way to the kitchen. They remind me of something, Greta said on our last night on the ship. We were standing on the deck watching the lights of the coast go by, that particular kind of night where the water is dark and the sky is full and you feel very small and very alive at the same time. My daughter asked me if I was lonely, she said. On the trip. Going alone. What did you tell her? She thought for a moment. I told her that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing, and that I'd spent a long time confusing them. I've thought about that most days since. I'm not lonely. I have Meredith and Seth, who call every Sunday. I have Marlo, who is going to New Mexico in June and has already sent me 3 restaurant recommendations, even though I'm not going. I have Oliver, who came over last month with finger paint, and we made a mess of the kitchen table, and it was the best Saturday I've had in years. I have 400 photographs and a travel journal, and Leonard's Nikon, and a list of places that have moved from someday to already. And I have something harder to name. The sense that the woman who stood at that kitchen sink in February watching a cardinal on a cold fence was the last version of herself who didn't know she could choose. Not the same woman who stood on the deck of a ship in the Adriatic and felt the wind and thought, "There you are. I don't need anyone's permission for that." Not anymore.